A city built upon mud, a culture built upon profit, free speech nipped in the bud, the minority always guilty. Why should I want to go back to you, Ireland, my Ireland? Her mountains are still blue, her rivers flow bubbling over the boulders. She is both a bore and a bitch. Better close the horizon. Send her no more fantasy, no more longings which are under a fatal tariff. For common sense is the vogue, and she gives her children neither sense nor money, who slouch around the world with a gesture and a brogue and a faggot of useless memories.
Well, I first came across MacNeice in that period between leaving school and starting university. Back when I was a boy, you got a dole check, you got dole money before you started university. And with my first dole check, I went up to a university bookshop at Queen's and came across MacNeice, the collected, Louis MacNeice. That was my first introduction to him. And he stayed with me the whole way through university. Reading and rereading his poems, making sense of my own life and my ambitions, failed love affairs, romantic entanglements, heartbreak. It's all there in MacNeice's poetry, and that's why it's been kind of wonderful now working with the BBC to be able to rekindle that interest and find a way of sharing it with a wider audience. And there are a huge number of MacNeice enthusiasts. He's a poet whose reputation faltered a little bit. He dipped or disappeared from view, but now I think he's understood as being one of the foremost voices in Irish and British and Irish poetry in the 20th century, somebody who really does need to be celebrated and more widely shared and understood. He was a poet who had a deep understanding of Ireland and its politics and all of the complexities that come with that. He was also a poet who wasn't at all comfortable with certainties. I mean, MacNeice, I think, would have preferred a question mark to an exclamation mark in pretty much everything, and that's a philosophy that I share.
In my childhood, trees were green, and there was plenty to be seen. Come back early or never come. My father made the walls resound. He wore his collar the wrong way round. Come back early or never come. My mother wore a yellow dress. Gentle, gently, gentleness. Come back early or never come.
Having studied him at school, he was one of the few poets who in any way meant anything to me. I was much more interested in novels. So what I liked about MacNeice was he's very good. He likes the word things. There's a wonderful imprecise precision. I like things. Sometimes you can't think of another word other than thing. And he's good about the stuff of the world. He's very interested in music. He's very interested in film. He was very interested in sport. And these were all things that I was very interested in. And so I thought that this was somebody I could relate to, even though he was writing. We were reading poems from the 1930s and 1940s, and there we were in the late 70s studying them. But he seemed very relevant, and he was a relatively young man at the time that he was writing most of the poems that we were reading.
People would have suggested to me that Louis MacNeice is a man who had some, experience of life in Belfast and around this part of Ireland, was somebody that I wanted to read. So that's really when I would have been introduced to him. I thought it was obviously the work of a man who was troubled within himself. He wasn't content. He wasn't at ease, and whilst he wanted to express himself, it was very much part of trying to find himself as much as trying to express himself. And he wanted to find something that was missing in his life, and find some way to ease his inner troubles.
He's an Irish poet, but the English seem to have a hold on him. So I think that would be my first recollection of him. That a very interesting life and a very interesting man, and a great poet and a great command of language.
His mother, which obviously was troubled because she died when he was at an early age. So really what he's trying to do is find some explanations for things that have happened in his own life and for how he turned out as a man. And he wrote it later in his life, but it refers back very much to his younger years.
A very lonely, sad man. I think that maybe stemmed from his childhood and his mother. A very untrusting man. You know, although he had a very incisive view of the world and a very incisive view of emotion. But I think his work reflects his personal life. You know, he was a bon viveur and he never settled down. But his work, very precise. The image is very precise. His love of nature is very precise. But what comes through it is the sadness from his childhood and the lack of trust and love. I think that's his poetry can almost said to be haunting in some stages.
When I was 5, the black dreams came. Nothing after was quite the same. Come back early or never come. The dark was talking to the dead. The lamp was dark beside my bed. Come back early or never come. When I woke, they did not care. Nobody was there. Come back early or never come. When my silent terror cried, nobody replied. Come back early or never come.
I think MacNeice was a very troubled individual. He had various personal upsets in his life, and that caused him to be ill at ease with himself as much as with the world and with other people. He found it difficult to strike those comfortable relationships. He drifted into strange relationships, both personal relationships and also his professional relationships with other writers and with other poets. And really his work expresses some of that difficulty that he had for himself and some of his own turmoils. And I think we ought to see it in that way, that he was a man who wasn't that comfortable within himself. He expressed it through his words, and that gives us rich literary art, but it also gives us a sense of deep sadness.
The way the world is now heading, I mean, you consider when he was born, you know, the war, and then the life that he would lead after it. The world was in the process of changing then. You know, I think the war changed everything. And, you know, dragooned into automation, I think is one of his quotes from that poem. You know, he felt, I think, that the world was going to be corrupt and that, you know, people were going to become dehumanitized and society was going to become dehumanitized, and that's what's happened, and that's what's happening. You know, automation is taking over. Jobs are lost to automation. There's no social interaction. I was in a cafe in Dublin yesterday, and I was the only one with a book. Everybody else was scrolling their phones, you know, and no communication. So I think he has that. It's becoming a very harsh, cruel world, and I think that's what he sees in a prayer before birth. And he fears for people like him. He fears for the artist, and he fears for humankind. And I think I would agree with that. Yes, I think the world is heading in a worrying direction.
I think the world has become more skeptical, so I think his views would have resonance with many people today. And in the changing environment, people have a different understanding. And he would have had an opportunity in the 1930s to travel quite widely, and he would have had an understanding of different perspectives, different cultures, different experiences of life that very many people of that area wouldn't have had. So they are perhaps more familiar to people in the modern era, where communications mean that we all live in what is essentially a much smaller world.
A couple of things I think. I think that Snow by Louis MacNeice, I think, should be our, I wouldn't say national anthem, our national lyric. I think it's a great poem. The drunkenness of things being various. He celebrates variety, difference. So I think that's hugely important in Northern Ireland. At the very end of Autumn Journal, the closing lines of Canto 24, there will be sunlight later and the equation will come out at last. He was a skeptic, but I wouldn't call him a skeptic. I'd just say that he was somebody who thought a great deal. He wasn't a knee-jerk follower of any ideology. And I think sometimes history looks a bit more kindly on people who don't automatically follow the herd. Sometimes people who are too quick to throw their weight behind a particular ideology end up looking a little bit foolish. I don't think he's going to look foolish.
I got up, the chilly sun saw me walk away alone. Come back early or never come.